So we're going to move on to the next speaker, that is Jinghan Zeng, Professor of China and International Studies at Lancaster University. Are you with us, Jinghan?
Yeah, I'm here.
Perfect. So if you wish to share your slides, you may go ahead, or you may speak as you are.
Right. Okay. So thank you everyone. Thank you for having me. I think I'm glad that De Montfort University is organizing this fantastic event. I used to work for De Montfort for 2 years, and it's really I mean, it raised a lot of old memories, of good old days in Leicester. I'm going to mainly focus on probably political perspective of AI, because that's mainly my area. And let me share my screen here. So I think I'd like to focus on two major parts. One is the authoritarian governance, which has been widely discussed about China's AI issue. The second is global governance and how China can fit in the current global governance architecture. And most of the discussion comes from a book that was recently published a few weeks ago on AI with Chinese characteristics, which I focus on the national strategy, security, and authoritarian perspective of China's AI plans. I think the overall argument is that China's AI strategy is very complicated and sophisticated with multiple dimensions. So to start with, China has big ambitions in AI. I think Chinese State Council has made very bold plans, as you can see here, of 3 strategic steps for China to become a global leader. First of all is by 2020, Chinese AI strategy or AI is going to reach the same level of leading countries such as the US, and trying to develop AI industry worth of more than 150 billion yuan by 2020. The second step is by 2025, China want to make major breakthroughs in some part of the AI technology. And by 2030, China want to become AI superpower. So the Chinese government is very serious about these plans and has made a serious plans to invest to make China the AI superpower. And currently, a lot of discussion has been focusing on how China's plans is presenting a challenge to American AI supremacy, how the rise of Chinese AI has been challenging American leadership in this area. This discussion is not only happening in China, but also in Washington as well. And if you really compare the different AI approach, China does present a very different approach in comparison with US or Europe. If you consider the US one is a market-oriented kind of AI approach backed up by funding or the market, and Chinese one meaning summarizes as a state-oriented kind of Chinese approach towards AI backed up by the data, by the consumer, by the huge internet user market in China. And in comparison, Europe is more of ethics-oriented or probably consumer rights oriented, backed up by GDPR, if you would like. But China is different. I mean, when we often compare, like China, Europe, US, we have to bear in mind China is a developing country, as many other countries we were going to talk about today. So China shares the same issue as other countries. For example, low cost of labor and a wide availability of working population. This means that China has much less financial incentive for changes in comparison with the US and EU. This is why Chinese approach towards AI is much more state-driven. And there is a clear ideological competition here, especially when it comes to how are we going to use AI, how are we going to govern AI. I mean, in the US, when Trump signed the American initiative, he said very clearly, we want the AI with American values. And the Europe approach is very much ethics-first approach with GDPR backed off. And what is the Chinese approach? Many has been linking that with the Chinese authoritarian regime and talking about authoritarian governance of AI and how this has been developing a very unique kind of approach towards how China is going to use AI. And there is obviously there is more and regulation and law in China trying to protect privacy and data regulation for AI. But most of those regulations focus on non-state actors, not state actors. So it just shows a very different social state-societal relation in comparison with Europe or the US. And when it comes to the issue of facial recognition technology, this is one very obvious example. China is now leading on AI facial recognition technology, and China will continue to invest. If you go to China now, facial recognition technology is used everywhere, by payments, airport, anywhere you can name it. I mean, they all use that nowadays. When you go to a supermarket in China, you can use facial recognition technology to pay. You don't have to bring even your phone. So that's very handy. But similar kind of technology has met considerable resistance in Europe or in the US, where they have been considering a black ban. In the US, for example, the use of facial recognition technology has been banned because of the racial issue, the George Floyd and Black Lives Matters. And they are worrying about how this might be misused. But this kind of conversation do not happen in China, and it's taken in a very different way, which I will talk about later. So it's same in the US. You got Microsoft, Amazon, and IBM trying to limit the use of facial recognition by American police. But in China, Chinese companies has been working very closely with Chinese security sectors to enhance the security and enhance police capacity. So if you look at the bright side, I think AI is here for better governance. I mean, China's big plan for smart city relevant to a lot of things, trying to make things a lot more smarter and intelligent governments, e-governments. AI is all supporting of that. There are lots of examples of how AI has been making things a lot more easier, making a lot of e-government thing much more efficient, or how AI has been helping the Chinese police to fight against child trafficking, for example, or a lot of other issues to make people feel safer. But at the same time, it raises a considerable questions regarding, is China now moving towards a digital surveillance state, or how AI has been empowering this big brother kind of narrative, right, of the surveillance. For example, it's not only a Chinese phenomenon, it happens everywhere. But in China, it probably goes a little bit far. For example, in Beijing, the Sky-led project has already been able to achieve 100% monitoring 100% of public streets, involving with 0.03 million cameras, 4,000 police. With AI, this kind of surveillance network and surveillance state is going to become a lot more powerful than before. And the Chinese government is very open about those ideas. It's said very clearly, we are here to avoid crowd gathering and street crime, right? So in comparison with Europe and US, China do not have much legal barrier for the government to implement those surveillance plans or system there. And another widely discussed plan is China's social credit system, which benefit from the financial, credit system. But then some analysts are worrying whether this is going to reach citizens according to your whether you are patriotic or not, or whether your views about the government, things like that, and how AI is playing a role. So all those discussions is happening in the context of authoritarian governance. And obviously in China, Chinese user has been suffered severely from the abuse of data and AI and etc. So it's basically the Chinese government has been handling to find the right balance. I think we have already talked about between security and convenience, right? How can we become convenient at the same time secure? I think the Chinese government now has been implementing a serious law trying to find the balance. But again, all those discussions focus on regulating non-state actors, not regulating government itself. That's a huge difference in comparison with that in Europe and the US. At the same time, I think that we need a global response to the transnational issue. I think previously the keynote speaker has also touched some part of it for lots of reasons: socio-economic equality, weaponization, data and privacy. But as far as Chinese AI and global governance is concerned, geopolitics play a very important role. To China, who shapes the future global AI order is a matter of politics. It's sitting in a wider geopolitical competition between China and the US, not only on AI, but on everything about technology or security matter, economic matter, all sorts of matters. So AI, global AI governance sits in this US-China geopolitical competition. And for China is who shapes future of AI, by which country, for which country's interests, in whose terms, is a matter of geopolitics. And currently, we have already seen the emerging global AI initiatives. For example, there's one summary of it. Some of them are state-led, some of them are non-state-led, and China is playing a role in some, but has been excluded in many. So China is trying to search for its role in global AI governance. But then the China's problem, tension with the US, has been put in here in every single of those global governance mechanism. For example, in the new created global partnership on AI partnership for defense, all those US-led or Western-led kind of AI initiative is created there precisely to fight against China, to build on democratic values, fight against China, or trying to build a more secure defense again with target China or Russia. So in that sense, China feels it's pretty difficult to actually to play a key role, which it deserves in the global AI governance. And China has been actively in working, for example, in G20 or United Nations, trying to use those platforms as a way to exercise its influence. But so far, it's not very successful. And part of that is relevant to, about the technological standards. A lot of Chinese scholars and Chinese research institute want to shape the future global standards to China and to US and to all the great powers. It's not technological. Technological standard is never technological. It's geopolitical. It's about national competitiveness. It's about agenda setting. It's about norm setting. So China is very clear that yes, AI is for safety and ethics, but we cannot let that sacrifice the Chinese national interest. And a lot of in the US are also saying the same thing. The more Chinese influence have in setting up future AI technological standards, the worse will be for American national interests. So we're basically securitizing kind of situation for the AI, and it's based on whose value to build a safe, trustworthy, and controllable AI-enabled system. So China has been saying it. The US has both China and US, probably Europe has been saying it from a geopolitical lens of how this might be affecting it. So it's never been geopolitical. It's never been technical, but also geopolitical. But then it's going to have consequences. The consequence is we're going to have a lot more competition than cooperation in transnational AI. It's a lot more national consideration AI standard rather than quality of AI standard, and it's going to destruct the more important debates on AI. I think the key thing here is human AI relation, but now the problem is the relation of geopolitics of China, US, Europe, how this big power or those major players fight with each other in AI, and it's going to lead to a very fragmented global AI governance system. So I think I probably have used too much time for this talk. I think I'd like to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jinghan. You actually just stopped right in time. So just really good presentation to hear your perspective on how we actually can see the different views of AI from different regions of the world and China's perspective in trying to define where it stands. So thank you for that.